Hi everyone, it's Paul from the Cockpit Method. Just going to have a little session with you today talking about my journey, bringing me from the commercial cockpit all the way to where we are now. I have the pleasure of being joined by my wife Amy, who's also my business partner, and two very special guests, my coaches. I've got Martin Stork and Nathan Seward, both from the Cockpit coaches. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand over to Martin, who's going to give us some questions, and yeah, let's talk about the journey.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Paul. We're going to dive right in. So for your people to hear your story, please describe how was your journey actually from the cockpit to actually start the Cockpit method? How did it emerge?
Yeah, so it started during lockdown. I lost my job with Flybe in March. UK entered lockdown pretty quickly afterwards. So we entered a bit of a phase of trying to work out what to do, really. Both me and Amy had many heated conversations about what we were going to do, where we were going to go, how things were going to move on. And I realised there's so much that I learned in the cockpit, so much that's kind of transferable that we can take beyond the cockpit into businesses, into education, now into health and social care. So it just felt like there's kind of too much there really to settle into a job. I've got too much to give really, and that's where the Cockpit method started.
And how was it for you, Amy, the early days from seeing Paul being furloughed again? Like it's kind of interesting, I suppose, to be married to an airline pilot.
That's one word for it.
So going like, oh, again?
Absolutely. I think initially you just go into shock, if I'm honest. And it was such a strange time for it all to happen. The world was in a very strange place. And I'm a teacher, so it was talks of the schools closing, not closing, and then whole year groups started being out of school. It was just, everything was really strange, and it happened on top of all of that. It was kind of it was almost like I couldn't process the real implications of it. And Paul had already been made redundant once before when I went into administration, so it was sort of, oh, here we go again. So right, we know what to do now. We've been through this already. Start the process, and then it became apparent that there weren't going to be jobs. Certainly not flying jobs, and then very quickly became apparent there weren't really going to be any jobs in the near future, and it was a big sort of, what on earth do we do now? And it kind of came out of a number of different conversations, didn't it, about the skills we have, like the combined skills we have, and how we could really maximize that. It started to become a kind of exciting seed of an idea, really.
And seeing businesses and the healthcare sector in particular, which is where we are now, kind of suffering, people were just trying to cope, that's all people were doing. Business owners were just living day to day. There was no forward planning. There was no real kind of working out, what are we going to do next? How are we going to weather this storm? And it just got me thinking of, if I was in the cockpit, what would I be doing? I'd be 3 steps ahead of this. I'd be thinking about, well, if this happens, I would do this. And if this happens, I'd do this. I'd be ready for any potential option. We would never go flying without knowing what's going to face us that day. And of course there are challenges there, and there are things that could happen to you. You could have an engine fire or a depressurization. These things can happen that you're not necessarily expecting, but you are planned for it. You are always planned for every eventuality. And I just wanted to bring that into business, really, and into the healthcare sector. I think it's something that's really lacking and still is lacking, really.
It's quite amazing when COVID came. As you said, like many businesses lost an engine at that point. And at the same time, one of the turbine blades went through the wing, creating a fuel leak. So now all your cash is running out. You're only flying on one engine, so your revenue is gone, you're losing cash, and what now? So there is time constraints, and the situation is so dynamic, it changes so rapidly. So that's exactly where your piloting expertise, the decision making, because we're used to that as pilots, right? Flying, and that's so great to see that you actually made the transition to see, I can use my transferable skills from the cockpit and to use it in the business world to actually educate others and to support businesses with this with the system, with all the training we have as pilots, the decision making, and to do good for other people, organizations, and further. And I'm really curious now, how does that show up for you and your clients? How do you bring it to them now? On a very practical example, like on a daily basis now, for example, you work with the NHS or anything similar?
Yeah, so we've honed it down to two main products really that we offer. The first one is a wellbeing program that we deliver with the NHS. Well, with health and social care in general, but particularly right now we're working with the NHS. And it splits into two areas really. So the first area is using the human factors training that I've gained to take into that setting. You know, many of these people have been told things like, if you're in a stressful situation, remove the stressful factor, remove yourself from that situation. That's the way to deal with stress. Whereas, you know, if we're in the commercial cockpit and you're over the Alps at 30,000 feet and an engine goes and you are immediately in this stressful situation, you can't remove that stressor. You can't remove yourself from that situation. If you've got a frontline nurse who's dealing with COVID patients and you tell them to remove themselves, they can't remove themselves. They're in the exact same situation that we would be in. So they need coping strategies, but not just the strategies as well. They need the knowledge to know why they're feeling that way, why their body is working in a particular way, and how they can deal with that. And then the second part of it that we do is we implement a conversation, basically. It sounds really simple, but it's the thing we don't do. We don't talk. We don't talk about what's going on inside, why we're having the problems we're having, the support that we need. It's too easy to bury your head in the sand and not talk about it. So we've created a wellbeing contract. And the basic principle of the contract is that each employee who does the training with us will give their own definition of well-being. So they will tell us what well-being means to them. And then they write down what they need. So what they need for support, what they want, how they want that to work. And then the crucial bit for us, which is the accountability, is the contract that they then produce gets a manager signed off. So their line manager physically signs off that contract to say, I am now aware of what you need. And that starts that conversation. The NHS have made a pledge to their staff this year that they're going to start having wellbeing conversations, and it's going to be something they do in an annual appraisal. So we are saying to them, this contract is the basis of your annual appraisal, that the manager is aware of what the employee needs. The employee has said, first and foremost, this is what I need, this is how I need to be supported. And it just facilitates that conversation and the accountability element throughout the year, rather than it just being a very short-term thing.
Well, this is such brilliant stuff, really like an impressive stuff that you've created, that you've both created. And it's one thing, you know, I had the privilege of talking to you sort of week on week in our program and sort of saw this journey from start to finish. One thing that's very different with you from a lot of other pilots is you have a tremendous amount of creativity, and you have a lot of, I don't know what the word is, but you put things into action very, very quickly. So it's like you have this ability to kind of create ideas, and then you don't seem like you're afraid to kind of go and jump in and put it into action and give it a go. So how did you cultivate that? You know, we don't sort of see a lot of overly creative pilots that are able to sort of take action as quickly as you. So how did you manage to do that?
I think I was really lucky that before I was flying, I was in a creative job. I used to work in the entertainment industry, mainly in theatre, but I did some events as well as a lighting designer. So that was a creative role. I'm really lucky with the NHS stuff that I'm doing at the moment. I'm working with two girls who work for the NHS that have set up their own HR business, and they've given me an amazing forum to have access to the people that I basically need to have access to trial this. Now, of course, if the product was no good, it wouldn't go anywhere. You know, we'd never get anywhere with it. But to have the door opened for you and have that support, you know, we have a weekly meeting where we can just sit down and I can say to them, right, I've had this idea, you know, I've had this amazing idea. This is what I want to do. And they can go, maybe we rein that bit back again, or that probably won't land very well in the NHS, or maybe try rework it this way. So I think having that support has been massively valuable to me, to just have somebody on the inside who understands what they're going through as well, and what they need in order to be able to implement it.
And it sounds like having the courage to really throw things against the wall. So, seeing what sticks, and knowing that, hey, this is not all going to be gold, but I'm going to throw it all against the wall and see what works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think trial and error is an amazing thing in business. It's certainly not a luxury we have as pilots to just give something a go and see what happens. I'm sure the passengers would love to know that that's what we're doing up front. But it's certainly something you have to do in business. And I think that's something you guys taught me quite early on, to just, I remember Nathan's analogy of the key and the lock. You have a key, don't necessarily go and try and find the lock that it fits. Try and reshape your key to fit the lock. And that's how it's been for me. You find a problem and solve it. I think that's the key, really, to making it work. No pun intended.
Yeah, I think that's actually interesting now that we talk about creativity, right? Because as pilots, we're very used to following procedures and checklists, and from very early on we're trained like that, right? So procedures, checklists, that's what we call SOPs. And now coming into the healthcare sector, actually, I guess that it's also quite common to have these kind of procedures. And now there's a creative pilot coming around who actually saw it, how it works on a flight deck. Now you connect with your creativity. What is it that you can bring, or what you're bringing already now to the NHS, combining these two, like knowing how to work very strictly with procedures, eventually checklists, and combining it with the creativity? Is there something you see that you bring forward?
I think with the health and social care sector, the big advantage that you have is that you are probably in one of the only other jobs where you actually understand their situation, that they don't have the luxury of choice, they don't have the luxury of time, they have to follow the procedures, they have people's lives literally in their hands, as you do when you're flying the airplane. And I think for a lot of the courses that they're given as part of their training within health and social care, they come away from it thinking, yeah, it's all well and good, but it doesn't apply here. And I think finally you're somebody who can go in and say it does apply, because I understand the circumstances that you're working in.
Yeah, and it's something I've really made sure is kind of fundamental to the course that I presented, is I don't give them a solution. At no point do I give any solutions, and I make that really clear that that's not what this is about. It's about giving them the knowledge and giving them the empowerment to say, actually, I can interpret this way, and I can interpret this way, and this is what works for me. I remember having a conversation with one of the nurses about, she'd been told about the effects of blue light, and I should turn my computer off and turn my phone off, and I should do this and I should do this because blue light's really dangerous. It's making me think that I need to be awake. And I just sat down and said, okay, well, let's break it down and let's look at how this actually works. And when we got into it, she does a lot of night shifts. And you're like, so you work in an environment that is full of artificial light. So it's impossible for you to reduce that out of your day. And actually, the blue light and the fluorescent lighting in an operating theatre or on a ward is actually what's keeping you awake when your body wants you to be asleep. So actually use that and know that that's what's happening. But then also understanding that if you finish work at 4:00 in the morning and you then need to drive home, that your body is going from this blue light being awake to actually it's now nighttime, it's sleeping time, and I'm driving home. So it's more than just saying to them, turn it off, get yourself away from blue light, it's really bad for you. It's giving them the tools to say, actually, sometimes you need to understand why somebody's saying that to you. And I don't think people get told that enough. They never get told the why. And I think that's potentially the world we live in, that as humans, we just want solutions. We don't want to necessarily think for ourselves. So forcing them to kind of think it through and come out with their own solutions it's massively empowering. And I love seeing those kind of light bulb moments that they have when they realize why something is the way it is.
Now, for any other organizations watching this and they might be also like sitting on the fence. They feel there might be something in their organization or business that is not working quite well. There is something, but what is it that you could pass on to them now to ask? What kind of questions should they ask themselves to really challenge the status quo, or to ask the why? What is it you would propose them to really reflect the situation and eventually from there move on with the support of people like yourself in the Cockpit method?
For me, it comes down to the diagnosis. It goes back to exactly what I was just saying. It's understanding what the problem is. It's really easy to scratch the surface of something, whether it be well-being, decision-making, risk management, but to be able to actually dig deep and look at the problem and see why you have the problem you have. You know, I remember being in the simulator quite early on in my career and having an engine fail and dealing with the engine fail, securing the aircraft and continued flying. And then 20 minutes later, we got another warning and we had a fuel leak. And that was why we had an engine fail, because we were being starved of fuel. We didn't diagnose the problem in the first place. We thought we'd diagnosed the problem. We kind of didn't dig deep enough. And I think that's where we are at the moment, whether it be health and social care, whether it be in business. It's easy to see a hole and stick a sticking plaster over the front of it and not actually look beyond that hole and say, whoa, there's, you know, what looks like something really tiny could be massive behind it. Similarly, something that looks massive might not be that massive when you dig deep. So that would be my big piece of advice really for anybody who's going through anything right now. And that doesn't even have to be in the business world, people in their personal lives. Just make sure you're analysing the situation you're in. Don't take the shortcut. You can't go wrong if you know what the problem is.
For me, this feels a very nice circle, closing it up. I mean, do you have any other question you would like me to ask you?
No, I don't think so. I think I've been thoroughly grilled.
Very good. So thank you for having us. And we wish you and the Cockpit Method all the best on your journey, and many, many businesses to benefit from your expertise of being a pilot and a coach and educator.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me.